COVID-19 has put a tremendous amount of pressure on us as a nation, but particularly on parents, teachers, and children. The ongoing debate of whether it's safe to take our children back to school has been a contentious issue. It is from this premise that I wanted to ask us, should we do it? Should we not? I'm a mother, I'm a doctor, and I want to know from expert leaders, pediatrics, world-class educators, and psychologists, including parents and children themselves. Should we take our kids back to school? Is it safe? I'm very sensitive to the fact that there are some schools where online education is just not possible, but where you have the option, where online education and quality tele-education, remote children's teaching is a viable option. Should this be considered? To quote the famous Shakespearean play, Hamlet says in Act 3, Scene 1, to be or not to be. I want to parody that and say, to school or not to school? That is the question. Come and join us, tune in, and let us hear from our professionals and from the voices of children and parents. Head to the big question. So I'm a mom and I am taking my child to school. And I think the biggest thing is for any parent, what are the risks of my child actually contracting COVID-19?
Okay, thank you, Malevu. We as pediatricians, we belong to basically two groups of in the country, the Pediatric Management Group and SAPA, the South African Pediatric Association. And a couple of months ago, like 3 months ago, they told us, because they did their research, and then they said the incidence of, or the risk of in children younger than 18 years would be something like 1 to 5% of all COVID cases. In the meantime, it has changed a little bit. In August, there's been research done by the South African Institute of Communicable Diseases, and they came out now in the last couple of weeks with a new incidence. So they say, with the research they've done, they see that the incidence of children younger than 18 years getting COVID is now 7.6%, and 7.6%, and 2.9%, it amounts for 2.9% of admissions to hospitals.
With that, we can look at it twofold. Firstly, in their household themselves. And we also get our research and our data from the South African Pediatric Association, the SAPA. They've been guiding us looking at the statistics. And what they've is that in families and household clusters, a child is really the index patient, which means that the child has not been the source of the infection. In most of the evidence and studies have shown that in a household, about 9.7% of the cases where the child was the index patient. Most of the time, they found that there have been other adults in the household contexts that had preceding symptoms. So that changed that the child is not the one bringing the infection. And in practice, we've seen, and with our colleagues, when a child is positive, their parents, we'd find that one parent was also positive, or there was somebody that came home to go through. So that helps us in the context of, will this child now bring home and spread to vulnerable members? Then the risk of a child contributing to the school outbreaks has been found to be very low. There's limited spread of coronavirus between children in the school themselves, and there have been no reported cases of large outbreaks in any country. And this was to support the argument that asymptomatic children attending schools are unlikely to spread the disease. This has been part of the South African Pediatric Association to bring about awareness for the reopening of schools, for allowing children to go to schools. And they have correlated in the Western Cape that our data is similar to what's been shown in Europe and in China, that very rarely children are the vectors of disease. They are not the super spreaders to go through. But then it comes to terms of the protecting the vulnerable population. So in who have comorbidities, this means any underlying condition, if they themselves have a cardiac problem, an immune deficiency, or severe risk factors in the household context themselves, if they live with somebody that has an immune deficiency, it needs to be taken specifically in their context and weigh the risks and the benefits to go through.
I like that, Dr. Padiaji, because, you know, it's important that you mentioned that generally the child is not the index case. So that may also shed some light, I'm sure, for teachers who are concerned, who may have certain comorbidities and have children coming through. Still sticking on the clinical aspect, Dr. Ahmed, if you can tell us which comorbidities would be the ones that we would be concerned with children. So if you've got a healthy child, it's all established, it's probably okay. But where would I be worried that this child may be more at risk of severe disease, so perhaps to keep the child at home?
That's a good question, Malebo. The association between COVID-19 and comorbidities have been pretty well established for adults. But only recently has it become a bit clearer where kids are concerned. And oftentimes, we treat kiddies as simply small adults. And as pediatricians, we belabor the fact that one should never do that. Kids have their own constitutions, they're growing, their immune systems are completely different to those of adults. The way they respond to illnesses differ to adults. The way they respond to medications are completely different to adults. So we cannot extrapolate. It's dangerous to do that. As Natasha and Dewald has previously outlined, we do know for certainty, thankfully, that children behave quite differently once they have coronavirus. The disease burden are not as pronounced as in adults. We do know that. The mortality rates are not as horrible as for adults. That's well established. And those statistics that my colleagues have outlined are quite important and instructive. So coming back to the specifics in terms of the comorbidities that children with coronavirus may allow them to be more compromised, they tend to be a bit different to adults. The kiddies that are compromised, they have more complex, multitude disease systems. Those are the kids that give us grief. For instance, a kid with cerebral palsy. So those do pretty poorly. Also poorly controlled asthmatics, they tend to do a bit more poorly if they pick up coronavirus. Those kids with complex congenital heart diseases, they may also be compromised. Cardiomyopathy, cyanotic congenital heart diseases. So they're a small minority of kiddies with cardiac diseases. Specifically worldwide, South Africa less so, but West Africa, America, kids with sickle cell disease, they sometimes do pretty poorly. So your veno-occlusive crisis become a problem in the context of coronavirus. Then the one thing that does correlate with adults is obesity. So obese kids, unfortunately, they form a higher risk in terms of severity of illness. And then also I think what's quite instructive is the fact that where children are concerned, the burden and severity and complexity of influenza A and B still far outweigh what
Yeah.
coronavirus does to kids. So more
Right.
kids are more ill with coronavirus, both in terms of number and morbidity, as well as mortality.
Yeah.
So I think that's an instructive point for us to just bear in mind. But thankfully, we have immunizations against influenza B, whereas currently we don't have anything yet towards coronavirus.
Sure. I think I got a lot of nuggets from that. I think the asthma part is quite important because basically a lot of parents are scared to come out and their kids are not receiving the asthma treatment. And if that is a risk factor, then it's something to just be aware of. I think just to go back to children being hardly ever being the one who brings it into the home. A funny story for me is quite important. I see there's actually a question there from a Mr. Kalaratz for either of the pediatricians. What the actual risk of a child with controlled asthma? What's the actual risk of a child with controlled asthma? Because we know uncontrolled is a problem, but if the child is taking their treatment and they're fine, is that an issue?
It's a very good question because it's a risk factor, Malebo. If the child is adequately controlled, taking their maintenance or their rescue pumps, the chances of them ending up in ICU or even hospital are actually quite remote.
Great.
In children at least. So it's the uncontrolled asthmatics that form a risk category.